thank you for being here as part of this beginning for us. So it's a new beginning. In the 25 years that the public access station has existed, we've had 5 different locations, so we're used to moving, but we're not leaving. Hopefully this will be permanent. And I wanted to also say that this will be the first of a series of speaking events focused primarily on climate, but also other environmental issues that involve animals and the planet and our civilization and where we're going and how we're going to get where we can be at a better place. There will be a speaker. there will be a speaker or panels of speakers each month that Nevada County Media will host, and it's what I'm producing in coordination with Shirley Freyricks. I think I got it right. And a lot of the other groups, the climate groups like the Climate Citizens Lobby and NC CAN and the Sunrise Movement. Darren, are you here? Darren's probably ferrying people from above. The Sunrise Movement, the youth movement has been involved as well, and we're going to try to represent as many voices in the community as we can to establish collaboration and dialogue. So the evening will kind of sequence into a number of phases with our speaker, Wilford Welch, and then a question and answer with cards passed around, and then some internal dialogue with each of us having a say in something if you would like to participate. But right now, I'd like to both thank Ramona for the incredibly hard work she's done over the last 5 or 6 months, well actually over the last almost 3 years, but the movement here has been in the last 4 or 5 months, something like that, really transformed the place. So we want to thank Ramona and Shirley.
It's such a huge job
Yeah.
to put all this together, and it was like right down to the wire, but they did. Thank you so much for letting us be here.
And one of the pleasures I have in doing this speaker series is to meet all the individuals who are like-minded, and Shirley Freyricks is establishing the EAN, Eders Action Network, and she's had a couple of meetings and some of you have attended. It's something as an elder we can do to help steward the youth and the community towards a better outcome. So Shirley?
I agree.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's really exciting to be here. We've been working on this for such a long time, and it was Ramona a long time, and Lou a long time. But I'm relatively new, so I'm just having the best time meeting all of you at the various meetings that you attend and that I get to attend. And just the whole climate issue. It's more than just climate. It's a social justice issue. It's a peace issue. It's got a lot of ramifications, and we'll be looking at that. And Eders Action Network does look at all those things, sustainability, all those things as part of the thing we call climate change. It's much bigger. It's a huge change in every realm of what we're doing in our society. Lifestyle, value changes. I mean, it's like everything has to change in order to accommodate the need of the earth that we'd like to leave for our children and our grandchildren and our future grandchildren. So, it's just really a pleasure for me to be here and work with Lou on this. And it's just as big a pleasure, if not more so, to introduce a friend, longtime friend from the Institute of Noetic Sciences. I don't know how many of you know the Institute of Noetic Sciences. And I met Wilford and his wife Carol there. And Wilford has been the reason I thought he would be interesting is to come to speak with us is because his perspective is more global. And it's also totally heartfelt, from the bottom of the earth. says he's been a U.S. diplomat, and he's done a lot of systems thinking and coaching and teaching and all kinds of things, around the world. And then Carol was taking groups of travel people, travel groups around. And I think you were in Ethiopia, something like that. 32 countries. But I think it was in Ethiopia that you encountered the people who were really suffering. They're the people at the bottom of the food chain here, that were really suffering from the ramifications of climate change. And so I think at that point, and you'll tell us more, that it became a super heart issue as well as a mental issue, that he could try and figure out solutions. And so, Wilford, please come and join us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shirley. I'm just leave this up here.
Yeah.
Okay. The old expression, it takes a village. But before you get the village going, you need 1, 2, or 5 people, or maybe more, or maybe less, to come up with an idea that's a powerful idea that attracts people, that people want to engage in. And so I want to really honor Lou and Shirley and Ramona for being the people who say this issue is really important and we want to get it out there and we want to mobilize the troops in more of a movement, or else we're going to suffer very badly, as I think all of you probably would agree with. I'm very honored to be here, and I'm very honored to be the first speaker. But the honor is more than just speaking to you. It's an internal opportunity that I have. I joke a lot, and I have a lot of fun and all the rest, but I'm actually inside fairly serious. And I've been focusing on this world of ours and the driving forces that are impacting it and where it seems to be going for an awful lot of years. And having to do something like this tonight with you all forces me to go deeper and deeper each time and ask myself, what is my truth about these many, many complicated issues that we're all wrestling with? And as Shirley just mentioned a moment ago, this isn't just global warming, climate change, and we attack it like most Americans do in a linear way. This is, we have to deal with climate refugees, we have to be dealing with plastics, we have to be dealing with economics, we have to be dealing with all of these things. The way my mind works, that's what I'm looking for and trying to understand. And then you have to peel this down and say, well, what is my truth about climate refugees? Or what is my truth about the capitalistic system that has done so much to benefit all of us? And how can we move that system in a way that serves the planet and people? All of those questions. So all I'm saying is I feel honored to have the opportunity to ask myself what my truth is. And when I write a book, you spend a lot of years in rewriting because you go deeper and deeper and deeper. So that's the honoring, and I thank you. I thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge the work of a number of organizations. I feel, even though Carol and I live in Sausalito, California, on a houseboat, I encouraged her to think seriously with me about moving up to this area about 20 years ago, for all the reasons that we moved to the houseboat 18 years ago. And 2 reasons in particular. One is, when you live on a houseboat or when you live in Nevada City or Grass Valley, you're up here and down there because you want to be closer to the natural world. You appreciate the natural world. And with 80% of the people in the world living in urban areas, most people have lost that sense of connection to the natural world. And it's something that we need to get back if we are going to, because you only take care of what you love. And if you don't know about the natural world, and you all do, and I think we do too, then you're going to take care of it. So I wanted to move there, Carol did too, but I wanted to move onto the houseboats for 2 reasons. One is I want to be closer to the natural world to be reminded who is actually in charge. On Monday morning, we got a call from the neighbor right across the way, And she said, just want to tell you that one of your kayaks has gone into the water and you might lose it. That was a very neighborly thing for the community to do. 2 years before that, we had a 70-mile-an-hour storm. And I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do something, and I looked out and I squinted. And I tried to see that houseboat that was there, and something was missing. And the fact is the houseboat had broken both of its moorings and had moved away, okay? Which meant that the pier that came on from that houseboat onto the big pier had dropped in the water because it had gone away and broken all the lines, the water line, the sewer line, the electrical line, and everything else. And they were stranded. And so Carol ran around to a neighbor, got a big line, and we started to work. And my point is that we are so honored to help our neighbor, and they're so pleased to help us. That's what community is about, and we've lost so much of that within our society. And the reason I'm mentioning that is I want you to know that I feel really connected to this community. In that sense, I also should mention that when Janet Cohen was the executive director of Circle, they hired me and I brought a colleague up with me, and for 6 months we worked on Circle's strategic communications plan to more engage the community in Circle's work. Okay, I guess that's enough that I want to say about that. So before I start talking about, quote, solutions to the climate crisis, or global warming and all the things that we can talk about that relate to each other, let me just tick off some of the conclusions that I have reached over these last 15 years or so of focusing pretty hard on this subject. And they're in some sort of order. One is, the world is in much greater trouble than we realize, than most people want to acknowledge. This global warming, climate change is coming at us faster, with greater intensity, and with greater damage, unfortunately. I don't like to say this, but I believe it to my core. There's the hockey stick effect. What's going on now is because we have not been paying attention in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, into this first 10 years of this century. For all sorts of reasons that we all can imagine, we have pretended that the problem doesn't exist, or we have played it down. Well, it's getting pretty late in that game. And now it is far more serious. I don't want to scare the heck out of you, but it's far more serious now over these next 30 years to 2050 than it had to be. We had the chance for incremental change, and we didn't take it. Now we have to take very substantial change, and it doesn't have to hurt. It just has to be substantial, and in ways that I will articulate in just a moment. So the second, and second I should say that the science on all of this is very clear. The scientists really do agree. There are some outliers, but the science is very, very clear. That's not the question. The question is how human beings want to deal with that science or change their thinking about that science. But the science, from my perspective, is absolutely clear. And the science essentially says, in very general terms, the science says that between now and 2050, because of our lack of focus on this issue, and the fact that the United States alone puts up 30 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere each year. Okay? And that only goes up about 6 miles, gets stuck there under a blanket of the atmosphere. And that, as you know, if you get into the science, how it causes the heat to get trapped, and there's for the global warming, which therefore creates the climate change and all the things that you know about. But we had that chance, and now we're so far into the game that I think the future is fairly clear as to what's going to happen in terms of sea level rise and temperature rise between now and the middle of the century. And it's not pretty. But I think also that we have, and this is really my third choice, or the third thing I'll mention, is we are not victims. No one should have a victim mentality about this, because we have total choice how this story ends. And the question is whether we have the capacity of the human race to take the actions necessary to deal. And I'm not very impressed. Okay? And that's my concern. But we have total choice. It is not we don't have a problem with the technology. The technology is there. Someone says, oh, it's a technology problem. Technologists will solve it. Technology won't be employed unless we have the political will to do it. And that gets back to us. So that's my next point, is that we're not victims. We have total choice how this story ends. The other thing, now that I've given the only gloom and doom I will give for the night, I would add that over the last 2 years, particularly this last year, the momentum has shifted, finally. And I think you could feel it. I think if you think about what you're beginning to hear in the papers, what you read on television, the fact that in the last, in the October debates between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, not a single moderator in 12 hours asked a single question about climate change. Now it's on people's lips. You have all sorts of people are in the political campaign forced on the Democratic side to really talk about what's real and wanting to talk about it and deal. The other reason I'm saying there's numbers backing my statement about momentum. And I'm not citing Yale because I went there, but the Yale Program for Climate Communications, which has been polling people in this great detail, Democrats, Republicans, young, old, Catholic faith, Jewish faith, all sorts of different dimensions, racial dimensions, et cetera, about what they think about global warming and climate change. And today, in the most recent poll, which was several months ago, there are 31% of Americans in their program that they call the 6 Americas. And I'm going to tell you what the 6 categories of Americans are. And they are broken down rather definitively about how this break down. One is those of us who are deeply alarmed, and I suspect a lot of people in this room are, deeply alarmed and actually taking actions in their food choices, their transportation choices, how they heat their home, all the things that we could talk about. Okay, that's over 100 million people. Okay, that's a lot of people who are deeply concerned and engaged. A year and a half ago, that number was 20%. So there's a big time shift in people's wake up and taking action. The second number is 26% are concerned. And what that terminology means, that they say they are concerned, they mean they are concerned, but they're not engaged in taking action. The truth is that's my audience, because those are the pins that you should be able to push over. Those are the people. Don't focus. I'm not focusing on those who, to their lying breath, will say it doesn't exist. We don't have enough time to focus on that, unfortunately. So the sweet spot is those roughly 100 million people who can wake up and say, wow, I want to be part of the solution. This is pretty exciting. Let's get on with it. Okay? So those two together is a total of 56%, whatever the number is. Yeah, 57%. Then there's a cautious 16%. There's a disengaged 7%. They're just not even focused on the issue. You talk about global warming, climate change, they don't know what you're talking about because they're focused on changing the laundry or whatever. The doubtful is 10%, and the dismissive is 10%. So those numbers are getting smaller and smaller. But we do have the problem of what the people say they're concerned about on so many issues, whether it's abortion, free choice, whatever it is, and what the politicians in Washington, how they are acting on those same issues. Like gun control is the same thing. Okay, I'm not arguing one side or the other. I'm just saying that there is a disconnect between the two, often. The other and the seventh thing I'll say in my just quick conclusions of my thoughts of all this work is that we really only have 10 years to really turn this thing around because of what I just implied, the hockey effect. And what I mean by that is, if you're looking at the graph, and this is 2020, and this is 2100, and sea level rise and temperature rise go slowly up. And then about mid-century, if we haven't done anything, it goes like this. And that's when civilization doesn't have much of a chance. Okay, that's a hell of a statement. But since I'm partnering that statement with the fact that we have total choice how this ends, and we have the capacity to do it, the technology, my point is, let's get on with it. And my whole life right now, besides Carol and family and nature and things like that, is trying to get people to realize that we have an opportunity here. We're at that crux point in human evolution where I think it's really a privilege to be right here and feel, wow, I could make a difference. Okay? That wouldn't be said in the 17th century. That wouldn't be said in parts of the 19th century. This is the big tent. This is the big deal. The Second World War, where 70 million people, civilians and combatants, died. 70 million people. This is bigger than that. This is more serious than that. But the good news is all it takes is our willpower to deal with it, and actions that we can talk about. I hope no one's going to leave because they've gone into gloom right now. Okay, and the last point I'll say on these conclusions is, if we don't act, Mother Nature will remind us who is in charge, which was my point about the houseboats. Okay? As I like to say, I'm not a big baseball fan, but I like to say Mother Nature actually bats last. So if those aren't our challenges, what is our challenge? What do we have to do to address this issue? So do what? And fundamentally, my view is that we have to change. I'm going to read my own words here because there's so many nuances to this thing. We have to change the deeply embedded global economic and business system powered by fossil fuels that has generated enormous economic growth over the last 75 years since the end of the Second World, of which I and most of the people in this room are totally the beneficiaries. Fossil fuel used to be called liquid gold for good reason. It was amazing what it could do in terms of plastics and power planes and power cars and all the things that we benefited from. But now its time has got to end. Not because it's bad, it's because of the unintended consequences of it. So, since the end of the Second World, but now, as I just said, threaten our very existence due to those 30 billion tons that I mentioned that are going into the atmosphere, and that's just from the United States. Okay? We have to stop that. We have to stop it now, and we have to stop it very fast, for very clear scientific reasons. It's not a question of whether we have to. We have to. That's the challenge, and that's the question of political will and addressing the system. We created the system, so now we have the opportunity to change it in subtle but very strategic ways to deal with the challenge that we have created. But our country and the world, our country is addicted, and that's the right word as far as I'm concerned. We're addicted to fossil fuels, okay? And the world is addicted to fossil fuels. So the challenge is how to muster the individual, community, and collective and national power to shift that away from fossil fuels to renewables that are now in many cases cheaper anyway. But how to unembed the system. Yeah, that is our challenge. And there's a whole question as to whether we should talk and use the word global warming or climate change. Those are politically charged issues. And I'd love to get away from those terms. I mean, the issue is we have a population, when I was born, of 1.7 billion people on this earth. Now, I'll let you think about what your guess is of what the number is. The number now in one person's lifetime, and most of the people's lifetime in this audience, is now 7.7 billion. So we've gone up 6 billion people in just 75 or so years. All those people, and I say, wow, isn't that wonderful? All those people have had a chance to breathe the air and live a bit of life. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have 7.7 billion people. And we are not living in a sustainable planet or in a sustainable way on a planet that could serve us. Okay? So that, coupled with fossil fuels that are supplying people with all the things that digging out of the earth and providing them with the things that they want, whether they need them or not, they want, is exponentially so much greater and has the unintended consequence of creating the CO2 that is creating the global warming, which is creating the problem. Okay? So we can't deal with the population problem. That's a given. Now we have to deal on the other side of things, and that is how we behave towards the natural world to support us and how we deal with each other. Yeah. This is one man's opinion, but I've focused a lot on it. Now I want to make a bit of a confession, and I've never made this confession before. And I'm glad to make it. I was, in many respects, part of the problem. We all were, by the way. But part of the problem, and this is not to brag at all on my part, but to say how deeply involved and committed I was to economic development of countries around the world, to helping corporations expand their businesses around the world, and feeling that all of this time during those years, particularly after I left the diplomatic service and where I was involved deeply in Asia during the Johnson and Nixon administrations, and went to a firm called Arthur D. Little, which is a well-known consulting firm, where I was the head of Asia for 10 years. And during those years, and then subsequent years with some other consulting work, examples is I was working for Aramco, which is the Saudi oil company, before it was nationalized and owned by Mobil Oil. And the chairman of the board asked me if I would, in a sense, get right in the middle between the Saudis and Aramco in trying to demonstrate to the Saudis that that Aramco, under Mobil Oil, was a good corporate citizen of their country. It didn't work, okay? And they were nationalized, OPEC was formed, and the price of oil went from $3 a barrel to $40, almost overnight. That was liquid gold. And that is what's been driving the world ever since then, to our benefit. But now it has to stop. I worked for Citibank. Citibank hired Arthur D. Little, and I ended up being the head of the case. And they said, Citibank came to us and said, "Okay, we're going to have a 10-year plan that we're working on for our entire businesses of Citibank, all around the world, and we want you to predict what the world's going to look like over these 10 years." And we said, well, no one can predict the future, and we can't either. And neither can you. But what we can do is we can tell you what the driving forces are that are likely to push the world in one direction or another. Nationalism, economic issues, social issues, the rise of China, whatever it may be, okay? And so I had about 50 or 60 people working. Some were working on various regions and countries in the world. Others were working on various industries. Software, hardware, all this kind of stuff. And we pulled it together, and we then said, this is the likely future, and that's about a 70% chance, and this way and that, and therefore, if we can't predict that, but we can tell you, if the world is moving in that direction, these are some of the implications for your business. Okay? And that's how I got my thinking about global climate change, driving forces and alternative futures and all that kind of stuff, which is the way I I'm wired up here. Toyota came to me and asked me if I would explore the third and fourth of their six-word 100-year vision. And that was my car. They've done a pretty good job on personal transportation with a combustion engine in cars, not trucks, just cars. My plane, personal plane, civil aviation, my boat. They wanted to use an engine to go into all those. And so they asked me to put together a team, and I hired the former head of the FAA and all sorts of fancy people, and told them after a year, don't do it. Okay? But I was helping a company try and think through what their strategy was, and that's what I did. And then I'll move faster here. And I taught in Iran international business management there, and I was the head of a study both in Taiwan and then in Korea to help them think through what their next, in one case, 5-year plan and the other 10-year plan for their electronics industry. And I wrote a Harvard Business Review article called The Business Potential of Southeast Asia. My point in mentioning all of that is that was the story that I told myself, that economic development driven by fossil fuels would help build populations, build prosperity, and help corporations be profitable and help everybody da-da-da-da-da. Okay? So that was the story in my head. And that's my confession in the sense that I confess that there were two things that I didn't take into account in my headlong rush into all of these things over those years. One was I didn't distinguish between bad economic activity and good economic activity. And what I mean by we have had a notion of economic growth at all costs to planet and often people. Our good friends, Pachamama Alliance, some of you know Pachamama Alliance, they're down focused. They started, the twists started in Ashwar territory in the Amazon, where Texaco went down there and was pumping oil out and wrecking their habitat, wrecking the land and damaging the livelihood of the people. And that was all counted as economic growth. BP spills billions of tons of oil into the Gulf, and the destruction of the natural world is not counted as lowering our GNP, i.e. our measure of economic success. But when BP pays workers to clean it up, that is counted. Okay, so we have a skewed economic system, and I get into this in my book a fair amount too, called In Our Hands, that we have a system that is based on economic growth at all costs, and that drives us. And we measure our success that way, but we're measuring our success in ways that are not serving people and planet in many cases. So I didn't focus on that, is my point. And the second thing I didn't focus on is the subject of this evening, which is the unintended consequences of fossil fuels into the atmosphere. And if I had, I might have done some things differently. Who knows? But it sure's got my attention now. So that was the story, if you will, that I was telling in my head. That was the story that we were all living. Okay? That was the great success of the Western world that then got spread to other parts of the world. Okay? And so, and this is now a question for you, so watch out. I'm going to ask you to get in groups and talk with each other for 15 minutes. And the question, and I'll repeat the question, but let me tell you what I'd like you to do. So if living the old story has gotten us into this crisis, what are some of the key elements of a new story we now want to live that will get us out of this crisis and to a higher level of human consciousness? Simple question like that. 15 minutes? Okay, you got that one? No, of course I'll say it again, because it is, what I'm saying is, if that's the old story, what should the new story be? Okay. And I'm asking, what is it? Is it getting closer to the earth? Whatever it is, whatever comes to your minds, this should be free form. Just think about, if the old story is the one that got us into trouble, what are the elements of a new story that people will have in their minds? Because as far as I'm concerned, values and drive behaviors and actions. Okay? If you want to make a lot of money and don't care, rape, rob, and pillage may be a pretty good way to go. Okay? That's a value that drives an action. That's a terrible example, but it makes the point. Okay? And so if I have been living the story of economic growth at all costs based on fossil fuels, and that story is now going to kill us, what's the new story? And I have a hooker in that question, because I see this, because I'm a very positive person, I see this crisis as an opportunity, if we take the opportunity, to actually push us to a higher level of evolution. I think we're heading in the wrong track with our greed and our individual focus and da-da-da-da-da-da. Now, that's my own view, but it's a strongly held one. So what is it that it would, what does that new story look like? What are the elements of that new story? And then after you spend, I'd like you to break up into groups of no more than 4. I mean, 5 is okay, but it's best in World Cafe technology and things like that to do about 4 in a group, 3 or 4, and spend 15 minutes, just talk about it, and then I'm going to ask some of you to speak out and say, well, this is some of the things that came up in our group, and we might do 5 or 6 of those people, and then I'll get back and I'll tell you what I see the elements of the new story. Okay? Okay, so have fun.
All right. I'll give the first one, but it's really Marilyn's idea, but she has my total confidence and vote, and that is, we need to get women more involved in the process. We need to have them in government, we need to have them in leadership positions involved, and we need to support them, because it's what has been missing in the whole idea of relationship. Relationship to one another, relationship to community, relationship to animals and the planet. So we need women, all right? Top that one.
I'm going to say that a little differently, if I may. Thank you. Come from there's the yin yang. I really like yin yang a lot more than feminine masculine. But to come from the gifts that the feminine has, which has to balance with the gifts of the masculine. But anyway, okay, is that okay, Marilyn? Okay. And who would like to come up now? Oh, good. All right. Go.
I think 2 things. One is that we need to unite folks to put people in office that support these philosophies. And number 2 is we have an ingrained system of capitalism that is a hard one to shift, and it's happening now with the formation of B corporations, if you're familiar with them, benefit corporations, which is a mandate for them to do humanitarian efforts within their corporation. So having the right people in office that would help transition those that are still stuck in the bottom line being measured, or success being measured by the bottom line, and used other forms of measurement to see success, doing good for the earth, improving humanity, that sort of thing. But that we then pass legislation that is mandating a transition to our economic structure, our corporate structure, to incorporate humanitarian efforts as a requirement is what they do.
Great. All right. Who's next? Don't be shy. Come on up here. We're just getting juicy here.
And those of you who do want to say something, please come up now so we can move along faster too.
Okay. One of the things was individual change, and individual change has to do with things like being willing to carpool. Just little things like that can help. Other thing, connection. We build community and connection to each other and the natural world. We have urban farming and hydroponic farms and things in the urban areas that relate us to nature. And we really emphasize love and appreciation of the natural world. We promote positive economic values for things that are being done, like businesses here that have put, like South Yuba Club has put in solar panels, Briar Patch has put in solar panels. So we have positive things happening, and if we could promote the good things that are coming from the economic benefit of that, and that really leads to change what we measure, because changing what we measure will help us to really focus on things that matter.
Great. All right.
We will need to change what is often considered to be a vital American value, and that is rugged individualism. And we will need to somehow be able to teach our young people that the time for that to have been a admirable characteristic is in the past. We need to be connected, work together, be team members, and having been an individualist in the past, served us well in the past, it no longer serves us well.
Great. Love it. Yeah, thank you.
So my group, I'm Cliff. We need to re-educate and find the discipline with that takes to look at the core of our ability to act concisely, to work hard at stuff, and to find the membership of neighbors and people locally with around us, so that we commune with one another and we re-educate ourselves to work further than we've ever done before. And I was encouraged immediately to the forces of like yoga and breath work and ways in which we could stand up and act at higher degree of purpose. So thank you.
Like many of you, I'm on Medicare. At my age, and I think this may also apply to you, I do a lot of thinking about what my legacy will be. And I think if we reframe things from the perspective of legacy, it's a way to do multiple things. One is to get elders working together, but also it's a way of uniting with younger people to acknowledge that the legacy we are leaving them is something we do have a choice about, as Wilford was saying. So let's work together to build a legacy that leaves something good for the young people.
You know, I was just going to say, I should introduce Darren. And here he is. Speaking of the young people that the elders are working with, Darren is one of the leaders of the Sunrise movement that we have now. Thanks to Sharon Delgado got this going here, and it's wonderful. So thank you. Let's hear.
Thank you. Ooh, that's still very bright. Your eyes doing okay up there? So, I've heard a lot of mention of individual change in the future. And that's lovely and all, but not everyone can afford to do the individual change like electric cars or like solar panels in the current economic situation. But I see in the future, my vision for the future is people joining together to make, to generate people power and to transfer that to political power, to pressure our representatives to actually represent us instead of corporations to pass a Green New Deal. You probably knew I was already going to say that because I'm from Sunrise. But yes, essentially from Bill McKibben from 350.org essentially says to someone who's asking, what can I do as an individual to make an actual impact on this, is don't be an individual. For actual change to occur on a systematic level, like to reform how our society works and create a new story, as our friend was mentioning, we've got to join together with those who are like-minded in our ways and actually reform how we work together rather than doing individual things, because we are so much stronger when we are in a group. Thank you. I hope that's a good lead off for you.
Anybody else? Please.
We talked about a number of great ideas, but one was about large corporations. And so one thing is any corporations that are damaging our environment, to boycott them. And one person said, you know, if you buy a share of stock, you have voting rights in these companies. And then someone talked about Amazon and how they realized that recently the packaging is much improved. You know, that they're using environmentally friendly packaging. So somebody has gotten to Amazon.
Yeah. Lance.
So we talked a lot about a lot of things, of course, but one of the things that I came away with, I'm going to speak for the four of us, sorry, is the plastic bottles that I heard on the radio today on the Sacramento public radio station. They're advertising Subarus, and they have 19 cup holders. Now, when I was a kid, we didn't have cup holders in their cars, and we didn't have plastic bottles, and we did just fine without it, and I think we can go back to that right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Anybody else inspired?
Okay, it's good.
Yeah, our little group, yeah, I think we probably values. You know, we talked about values. You know, what's underneath what we do, and I know you feel that way too. You know, what's underneath what we do, and how do we act, and to say, you know, what can we do if we knew that the earth could feel, would we do things differently?
Sure. Well said. Thank you all. And Darren, if you would, I hope you will stick around because I'm going to get into the intergenerational piece, which oh, good. Okay. It's good. So I'm going to move a little faster now, only because of time, but I want to not go so fast that I'm racing, but really communicating. So I'll try and balance those. So in terms of the way I think about the new story, I think of it, one, on the values piece that Shirley just mentioned, and the other is the systems change. This change in our values and our consciousness, and the change in the system that we have created that is creating the problem, and how we go about that. So that's the way I'm holding this. Doesn't mean I'm right, it's just a way of doing it. In terms of the new story on the values side, I think we need to have a vision of what is possible. That's why I asked that question the way I did, of what is possible if we all start to work together, and how we can create something that is even more satisfying in terms of human beings. People talked about community and things like that, which obviously I'm referring to. I think it is important that that vision or that story acknowledge that global warming and climate change are really a clear and present danger, that's what we're referring to. That's the anchor. That it's based on hope and not fear. It's a positive, not a negative. That it offers future generations the possibility of healthy and meaningful lives. Those are three of them. Another piece is the importance of balance and harmony. Carol particularly has, in her 32 countries, focused originally on the wisdom of indigenous cultures, and I was a tag along on a lot of those trips. So I've had a lot of exposure, she has, to what those wisdoms are. And to what I sense is that there are really three things that indigenous people can teach us that we have forgotten in our headlong rush to modernity. One is that they hold the natural world as sacred. It's not property. It's something that they want to steward so that in turn they can benefit from that stewardship in terms of survival and agriculture and all the rest. So we need to shift the relationship between ourselves and the natural world so we get in harmony, in balance with the natural world. That's very fundamental. The second is that we have moved so far away from being in relationship to each other in community. I'm not saying in Grass Valley or Nevada City. I'm saying you, and I think Sausalito in many respects, and the houseboats are the exception. But the world as a whole is focused, and of course some of the comments were made about individualism. And we've gone so far that way that we have lost the sense and the satisfaction of working together, of actually being out there and getting that line and tying those two women so they could come back and their boat wasn't destroyed. So it's being in balance or harmony with the natural world, each other in community. And the third is we seem to have lost our sense of our relationship with ourselves. Sounds like a funny thing to say. There's so much out there that's now coming at us that is trying to define what we should have to be happy and have meaningful lives, that we're not looking inside and saying who's inside and wants to come out and who's the authentic person there. So I wrote a blog about this in this website that I have, which is a funny name, wilfordwelch.com. And you can't see it very much here, but I have it on the back of my car. It's a bumper sticker, and I have made about 100 of them. Anybody in the audience that wants to have one can have it. And just remind yourself and put it on they're on the table right over there. And what it says is, I will seek balance with the natural world or nature, community, and self. And I'm suggesting that that's a direction that we need to move, or nature will be destroyed. A community cannot provide the meaningful lives that we're seeking for. So that's very important, at least to me. I should read, I shouldn't, but I'd like to read from Frances LePay, a short thing that she wrote in the New York Times Magazine in December. The more we align our individual choices with the world we want, it doesn't change the world, but it changes us. We become more convincing to ourselves. We feel less a victim. The solar panels on my house, the clothes out on the line instead of in the dryer, eating low on the food chain, taking the bus to work. It makes me feel less powerless and more engaged. Okay? I thought that was fairly profound. So in terms of the indigenous pieces, when Carol and I had the opportunity of creating two conferences in Bali called Quest for Global Healing. Was anybody at either of those? There were 1,000 people from 40 countries and Desmond Tutu and all sorts of things at those conferences. And we were really going deep. But the most valuable thing of those times in Bali was the phrase that the Balinese had that wasn't mentioned at the conference, which is Tri Hitakarana. And what it means, pretend I'm Balinese, that I will live each day in harmony with the natural world, with others in my community, and with myself, or spirit, as they call it. So that's sort of the genesis of this as well. And I think it's pretty powerful. It speaks to me. The second so those are just some things about the shift in values and consciousness. The second is terms of the shift in the system. How are we going to move away from the deeply embedded parts of our system that no longer serve us? And what I'm referring to is we have to get off this addiction. We have to do it in a matter of years, not decades even. Incrementalism doesn't work as it might have in the 70s and the 80s, et cetera, as I said. And we need to create an economic system that, one, is fueled by renewables. That's totally possible. Obviously, there are some industries that is challenging to do that, but it's possible. Distinguish between economic growth that harms people and planet and growth that supports people and planet. I mentioned that before. That redefines prosperity. That we no longer think of prosperity just in terms of the money in our pocket, but in terms of our relationships and all the rest. And how do we do that? That maintains an economic system that maintains high employment and social stability. Now, that's a real challenge to do all of that. If you're an economist, you say, ooh, but we can't change all of that, and we have to have economic growth at all costs because that is going to provide us with the tax money to pay down our debt. And if we don't pay down our debt, national debt, then the whole system comes up, down, it breaks down. So there are all sorts of subtleties of how we make this transition to an economic system that is just the way we want it for this new, off of fossil fuels, and still serves the planet and people, and it's absolutely possible. So in essence, I think we need, and this isn't a political statement, in essence we need something akin to the Green New Deal. We need something that's very, very fundamental. And that Green New Deal that I think really is essentially saying we've got to get off fossil fuels immediately. That's point number one. We have to employ those people who were in the coal industry and all the rest to putting in solar panels and the other things in the new economy. Okay? Those are the two things that I'm really focused in on, of maintaining, getting off fossil fuels and keeping employment in ways that serve people. Then I'm saying, well, that's interesting, but how are we going to bring about those shifts? So I want to talk a little bit about the players. And since, Darren, you're right here, I'm going to start with the youth. I feel deeply that most of the people that are in this room who are not youth need to really get behind the youth. They are speaking truth to power. And they don't have power, except they have power only in their ability to galvanize, mobilize a movement, to wake those people up who are so deeply embedded in our system of money and oil and politics, that we need to break that link and move to a positive system. It's not tearing it down, it's bringing about shifts in it. And the youth, I think, Greta, who we all talk about, when she was a 15-year-old girl, she sat all by herself in the rain in that parliament in Sweden. And 2 years later, she's speaking in front of the United Nations and at Davos and at other places. So she touched a nerve. She spoke truth to power and people heard it. And power is actually responding. She can't make the changes, but she's got their attention. The Sunrise Movement is doing a terrific job, okay? Really is. I give you total, I'm so proud of what you're doing. And also the Extinction Rebellion in Europe is also doing an important job. So we've got to get behind those youth. I took the audacious, I put the subtitle of my book in our hands, A Handbook for Intergenerational Actions to Solve the Climate Crisis. And what I thought, and what I've now done the research to support, is that our generation has more financial resources than his generation has. We have more contacts that may be pertinent to some of the solutions that they're wrestling with. We have time. Okay? We have some experience that may be relevant. Maybe some of it's not, but may be relevant. And I think we should have a little bit of guilt. Not such a bad thing. I disagree that we trash the planet and all of those things. I think we've got to get way beyond that. And I think the generations have to figure out how we can support them in taking the lead and change the relationship. At the Climate One conference in San Francisco, I asked a question, and the leader of Sunrise and these other groups was all there. And I said, what do you want the relationship to be between the younger generation and the older generation in this intergenerational actions? And the answer essentially was, we don't want you behind us. We sure as hell don't want you in front of us. We want you beside us. And I thought that was intriguing terminology. Okay? I find, if I can be, then I don't mean the eyes too much, but I went to Findhorn over in Scotland at a Climate and Consciousness, and I had a workshop in which we had the older generation, younger generation together, and learned what they both thought about this issue. Then at the Presidio Graduate School in San Francisco, one evening, 25 graduate students, 20 members of Elder Climate Action is sponsoring tonight, and then did the same thing at the Redwood High School, asking the same 3 questions. What could we do together that we cannot do by ourselves? Is 1 + 1 = 2 or 5, if done properly? The second question is, what's the barrier for Darren and I working together? I'm using just you and myself as example, and I'm talking about all of us. And the third is, if those are some of the barriers, then how do we overcome the barriers and get on with it? And I wrote this up in a long blog, and it's just the research of what I learned in the youth and the older people's terminology, not my interpretation of their terminology. But one of the key things that I learned, particularly in Findhorn, in some of the statements, was that the younger people say, we don't have the spaces. Very interesting term to me. We don't have the spaces to connect with the older people. You had your churches, you had your community centers, but we don't connect very much with you. We don't even see you very much at Christmas. So it's not natural for us to connect with you and ask for your help. We don't know how to do that. Now, that was just some comments, but there's a real opportunity here of the intergenerational. That's what I'm really saying. And I would love to see you all in Nevada County and these 2 towns really focus in on this intergenerational question. That's my point. I think there's a huge opportunity here to address many of these issues that we're all talking about tonight. In terms of corporations, it's very interesting to see the corporations. They must take a leading role, and they have to take a leading role in doing what they haven't been doing in the past, shifting what they have to do. And that's moving actually fairly quickly. And it's about time, and it better move even faster. In this book that I wrote, I said this, which now seems to be becoming, I won't read it from here, I'll just read here. To many, the response from the business world to the challenge of climate change was surprising. Many businesses realized that it was in their self-interest to act, and they proved more agile than imagined. They could see the spiraling costs of operating in climate chaos. They knew that they would not only lose money, but also customers, talented employees, and investors if they did not authentically address the issues of reducing carbon emissions and the efficient use of resources. Millennials in particular were quick to call out corporations that sought to continue business as usual. Now, since that time, BlackRock, which is the world's largest financial advising firm, which has $7 trillion under investment, has come out, Lawrence Fink, the CEO, and basically say, not because we're do-gooders, he didn't use that terminology, of course. He said, because the world is moving off of fossil fuels, we are shifting our portfolios off of fossil fuels. That's $7 trillion. That's sort of big money. Okay, now that's not all going to happen one day and all the rest. You see endowments of universities that because of pressure from the students, the trustees are saying, okay, you're right. Okay? You're seeing JetBlue that came out to become say they could become carbon neutral in all their flights in the United States by July of 2020, partly using biofuels. You see Microsoft that came out a month ago and said that they will be carbon negative by 2030. You saw Davos's Klaus Schwab, who was the fellow about my age that's been running it all these years, that came out strongly in support of youth and the need for business to shift. You see this from the former chairman of Unilever. He started an organization which is called Imagine One, in which their opening lines are, "We are business leaders who believe. Humanity and our planet are facing historic challenges, and CEOs around the world recognize it. From the climate crisis to widening inequality, we read the news and in between the lines. Governments cannot reverse the trajectory in time. Youth movements and civil societies are mobilizing but cannot change the system. Business is either part of the solution or part of the problem." So I wanted to be ending up here in a very positive note. The shift is taking place, and you all, and myself, and he, and everybody else, has to be really focused like a laser on doing what we can do. Okay, some people can dry the laundry on the line, and other people can change the trajectory of $7 trillion in financial assets. Okay, it's quite a difference there. Governments. So governments have to actually move too, obviously. And we are so addicted, and the political establishment so tied to the fossil fuel industry, that, for example, our government provides $20 billion still in direct and indirect subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. That's $20 billion that if we put pressure on the government through our voting and all, we could change those subsidies to go to renewables. There's a lot of stuff we can do, and a lot of it's relating to voting, which was one of those comments. I'll stop right there and just switch to about 5 quick one-liners on local initiatives. And I'm going to be around for, I can only stay here until 3 o'clock in the morning. So my first, and you'll see it on this little sheet that oh, by the way, I produced Shannon Wheel, who's right there in the middle, okay? She designed and produced this little sticker, which is, "I'm with Greta," okay? And I bought a whole slew of them, and I'll put them out here, and anybody who wants them, put it on. I have one on my bumper sticker, and that's a way of mobilizing the community and supporting youth, if that's what you want. And get another one that says, "I'm for the Sunrise Movement." Okay. And then I also have a sheet here, which is sort of an action sheet of things that you can focus in on, and those are all sitting there as well. But in terms of what are the actions, people always say, "Oh, but what can I do? I'm just little old me," and all that stuff. That's hogwash. There's a lot that people can do. They just have to do it within their own capacity. They don't have to do more than they can do. They just do what they can do. And one is, it doesn't cost you any money whatsoever. And it's your civic responsibility, and that is vote. And get other people to vote. And I promise you, if anybody in the local Sausalito comes to me and says, "I want your vote," I ask them where they stand on global warming and climate change. If the county, someone comes at that level, I say, "Where do you stand on global warming and climate change?" If for the Senate or the House, same thing. And for the presidents, the same. Okay? I only have 2 criteria, and I'm not trying to say that this is what should be your criteria. I only have 2 criteria in this election. And who can change the administration that we don't, if we only have 10 years, we can't allow for 4 more years of dealing with this, okay? And the second is who's serious about climate change. But we have to do the first one first, because that's the one that's the killer, okay? And I'm not getting into personalities, I'm just saying that the policies of supporting the fossil fuel industry and subsidizing all of that is a killer, for all the reasons that I've said. So one is to vote. The second one, and to get out the vote, and hop on the plane and fly to wherever you have to fly to, or take as Greta would do, she'd take a vote there, and much better. Okay. The second is to try and get within this county alliances between like-minded NGOs. You have so many, Circle, but many other wonderful organizations that are NGOs that are doing, some are working on rivers and others are helping educate young women in India, and others are people who are working on this and that and this. Every single one is doing God's work, okay? And I support every single one in terms of their work. Now we have, but the sum of those 20 organizations is 20. We've got to figure out a way of getting them to continue, you all continue doing your work in your organization, but also be supporting a bigger vision and mobilizing more people around that vision. I'm not trading resources or any of that stuff, but I think that there's more to be done, just like I'm talking about the intergenerational. There's more to be done with organizations collaborating with each other. Another one is, Carol and I just had 6 households come to our houseboat for 5 weeks in a row, and it was called Resilient Neighborhoods. And it was started by a wonderful person who's just got the Woman of the Year in Sausalito, or Marin, Tamara Peters, and she created this program 9 years ago. And each of our households agreed to reduce our carbon emissions as much as we could. And Carol and I agreed that we could take probably 25%. And it's easy. No sacrificing whatsoever. It's just consciousness. And I'd love to see that program, or another program that Steve Dinan mentioned today, and I forgot the name, and although I know the fellow who's running it, and he has it nationally. So you come to me and I'll get the name, and you start a program like that, and it's fun. Saving money, saving the earth, solving the problem, and doing it in your household. What's not to like? And you're not sacrificing. Okay, you're just being aware. Next to the last one that I'm going to mention is I went to a gathering in Marin last week, and three experts talking about microgrids, solar panels and things like that. And I called Carol even before, and I've been talking about it for years, but we haven't been able to get solar panels on our houseboat. But this now technology's changing and all. And I said, we've got to get solar panels. The PG&E cost is absolutely absurd. That's going to pay for itself within a year and a half. Get off the grid. We're solving the problem, helping to solve the problem. And so I said, we got to do that, and we put in a power panel in which we collect what we don't use or give to PG&E, and we got that, and then when a fire occurs or one thing or another and the PG&E turns it off, we still have the power. So we're doing good work. We're just thinking about how we need to make that change. So I just want to plant a seed. It's solar panels, but it's also microgrids, which is a different thing, and I think I'd stumble along if I did it. But the last idea, which good or bad, I don't know, I could see just as Circle. Well, let me say what I'm talking about. That either Nevada County or one of the towns becomes a model for the United States. A model for the United States on taking on this problem and showing what can be done. And doing it with diverse populations. It's not Republican and Democrat or one thing or another. It's people who are all searching for common ground, and the common ground is we want a healthy planet. People. Okay? This is crazy that this is a national political issue. It should be, it's in all of our interests to solve this problem. Okay? What the politics should be about is how we do it. What policies are put into place. Not whether we got a problem. We've got a problem. But we got stuck in this politics stuff. So let's figure out how to get global warming, climate change out of the politics in terms of where it's real, because it's real. Now let's focus on the solutions and work together on that, and have Nevada County be a county that is working across all sorts of lines, young and old and all the rest, to show the nation that that can be done, and then put into place, however you want to call it, some of these things that you have suggested up here, I've suggested, that will actually turn this ship around. It can be done. We did it in 1941 on December the 8th, when unfortunately we declared war on Germany, and the United States became essentially, I'm exaggerating, but became one in which people put aside their needs and wants, and industry put aside its needs and wants, and everybody got together, and we did an incredible thing. And we could do that on an enemy which is actually a bigger challenge than that was, and that was pretty damn big. So I'm suggesting we get on with it. We can do it. The future is indeed in your hands, my hands. Thank you very much.
From the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, a new hero will emerge. One who is ready. One who makes sure their friends and family are set. And has the power to go at a moment's notice. This fire season, you're the hero. We are Ready Nevada County.
one of our goals as an agency is to bring that awareness that in our community there's still needs out there for firewood, especially in the senior population, and that as together as a community, we can meet that need.
Each year gets a little harder and a little harder, but just seeing this, I feel like one of the lucky ones.
Thank you to Stifel Financial, proudly helping individuals pursue financial goals, businesses and organizations raise and protect capital, and communities offer a higher quality of life. To learn more, visit www.stifel.com.
This is a story of gumption, perseverance, and damn luck. It starts with this man.
Charles Lytton was Einstein brilliant.
He was a genius, made countless contributions to the high technology of his time, vacuum tubes. In 1953, he moved from a young Silicon Valley to Grass Valley, California.
I think that's what happens, right? A lot of us, we found a way to get to Nevada City, Grass Valley, or we found it for the first time, and we don't want to leave.
Soon after, he talked his friend Dr. Donald Hare into starting his engineering business in the same mountain town.
Doc Hare, Grass Valley, I believe came to Grass Valley almost as much for the area as everybody else, but he knew Lytton.
Doc Hare and a small cadre of incredibly talented engineers quickly made their mark on a new technology that was captivating the world: television.
Grass Valley knew how to do things with a transistor that previously took a tube.
What came next is decades of innovation, ultimately leading to dozens of spin-offs and related technology companies who themselves made countless world-changing contributions.
How they got to television is this circuitous path of technology that I don't think anyone would ever predict.
The fact that any of this happened at all is technically improbable.
Election officials work hard to maintain the integrity, security, and privacy of elections in Nevada County. Every registered voter in the county will receive a vote-by-mail ballot in the mail. Have you ever wondered what happens to your ballot when you send it in? Returned ballots are received at the elections office where they're processed and counted. Each voter's ballot envelope has a unique barcode that gives you credit for voting. This ensures that each voter can only vote once. Every signed ballot envelope is compared to signatures on file for the voter in our database. If your signature matches, your ballot moves on to the next step. If your signature is challenged, you'll be notified and given instructions on how to correct the issue. The two most common reasons a ballot envelope is challenged are the envelope isn't signed or the signature doesn't match the voter's record. A challenged ballot will be counted once the problem is corrected. You can check the status of your ballot at mynevadacounty.com/elections. When voter signatures are verified, ballot envelopes are opened and the ballot is removed, unfolded, and prepared for processing through scanners, which total up the votes. Results are tabulated and released after the polls close on election night. When you vote by mail, you can be assured that your vote counts and that your ballot is both secure and private. If you have any questions, contact the Nevada County Elections Office or visit us online.
We are here for a very short period of time. My goal is to make sure that the impact that I create, it's a good one for future generations. My name is Javier Zamora, and I'm a farmer, and I own JSM Organics. We grow lots of strawberries, vegetables, and flowers, all organic. My farm is located in Monterey County, about 3.5 miles away from the coast. What makes this area really unique is our weather conditions. This is a strawberry land, where Mother Nature allows us to grow these beautiful fruits. My ranch that I now own is a 200-acre ranch, and 120 of those acres are part of a conservation easement. If I didn't have a partner like the Alcorn Slough Foundation that put in the money to have an easement on my property, it would have been really difficult for me to own a piece of land. And what's a farmer with no land? It's like having a painter with no canvas. How do I manage a farm this size organically? We allow Mother Nature to do its thing, and we're not pushing things in a way that would jeopardize the flavor, because we don't use any chemicals. Conventional people would spray for those insects. We actually vacuum them. We have a vacuum that is mounted on a tractor, that it goes above the canopy of the strawberries, and it actually gives those bad beetles a ride for their money. About 2 years ago, I was approached by a packaging company. They had developed a new way of packaging strawberries or different vegetables with no plastic. Immediately I say, yes, this is it. My customers are going to be very happy with this. We don't need any more plastics to be dropped in the ocean or landfills. This is a beautiful package that you can go ahead and throw it in your compost pile, but it's definitely not going to be in the ocean. My philosophy about workforce is that people need to be happy and get paid well for what they're doing and what they're contributing to, in this case, the farm. I'm really happy to say that my employees get at least $2 to $3 more per hour than what some people around would pay them. So we have employees that are really happy, and we get people that are really eager to come and work for the farm. Can't think of, how sad the past was, or why didn't I start farming immediately when I came to America. That's just the path that destiny had for me. Now that I own a farm and I can have lots of people being fed out of it, makes me extremely happy.